Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Environmental Economics series. If you haven't checked out the recent video of my trip to the desert Southwest with a good friend of mine from college, you ought to do so. Found some very cool stuff in Arizona. As always with monsoon season, you don't find everything you're looking for, but it seems like every time I go to Arizona I at least find a few really cool things. Tiger rattlesnake in that video, some old friends like blacktail rattlesnake, western diamondback, Mojave rattlesnake, Arizona tiger salamander, some cool frogs and toads. So you really should go check it out. But as part of that trip to Arizona and then about a day and a half in Vegas, I stopped by Hoover Dam, and I thought it would be fitting to make an environmental economics episode to go along with our series where we've been kind of sort of diving more into the practical applications of some of the topics from the first few episodes last year. And talk about water conservation in the American Southwest, the allocation of water on the Colorado River, and some of the challenges that the southwestern U.S. faces right now. I tried to get some video at Lake Mead, but it was extremely windy, and so that footage is, is not worth really anything. It's just syllable, syllable, wind, wind. So I'm going to insert the pictures of Lake Mead and kind of talk through what was going on. So for the rest of the video, I will be a disembodied voice, and you will hear me, but you'll be seeing pictures of Lake Mead for most of it. So I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you very much for watching my channel, whether you patronize the herping videos and these, or just the herping videos, or just these. And I hope wherever you are in the U.S. or around the world, you're staying cool. It's a nice 98, 99 degrees here in southwest Missouri today. So anyway, enjoy the episode. You're looking at a picture of Lake Mead that I took while on vacation. Lake Mead is formed by Hoover Dam, which dams up the Colorado River, the largest river in the American Southwest, on the border of Nevada and Arizona. At the time of Lake Mead's construction between 1931 and 1936, as part of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, his effort to try to rescue the American economy from the depths of the recession with government spending, this was the largest dam in the world. It cost the lives of over 100 workers before the mighty Colorado River was tamed, creating the largest reservoir in North America in the process. And here's a picture of the memorial to those workers who died constructing the dam. Today, Lake Mead provides hydroelectric power to millions of customers in California, Arizona, and Nevada, including the Las Vegas Strip. The water from the yearly snowmelt of the Rockies supplies the river, particularly the western slope of the Rockies in western Colorado, where the river's headwaters are. And it flows down the mighty Colorado and provides both drinking water and irrigation water for the states of Colorado, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and California, the nation's most populous state with over 30 million residents. But there is a problem. With a declining long-term trend in snowmelt, exponential growth in the metropolitan areas of these states, and continued high agricultural production in the southwestern states, there is not enough water flowing down the Colorado to meet the demands on it in the long run. At least not the way the incentives are currently structured. As you can see in this picture of Lake Mead, there is a clear water line on the rocks that is hundreds of feet above Lake Mead's current level. As recently as the early 2000s, Lake Mead was completely full at a water level of 1,229 feet. But last year, the lake hit an all-time low of only 1,040 feet, which led to the first mandatory water reductions in the Colorado River allocation system's history. Although levels have rebounded last year with stronger than normal winter and spring precipitation and releases from Lake Powell upstream in Utah, lake levels are still over 100 feet below their long-run average and are much closer to dead pool, the level at which Hoover Dam would not be able to produce any electricity, than they are to normal. The states which rely on the Colorado for drinking and irrigation water know the long-run status quo is untenable. This has led to some drastic actions, including the state of Nevada paying Arizona to pump some of its allotted water into underground aquifers. Thus,
reducing the loss from surface level evaporation. Whereas if the water were to stay in Lake Mead, particularly during the summer when it's 100 degrees, a share of it is evaporating every day. Nevada actually pays the state of Arizona every year to store billions of gallons of its water allocation in underground aquifers within the state of Arizona. Although most people would think of the increased residential usage from booming cities like Phoenix, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, and Tucson as the main culprits in this story, the real story is more complex, and it's more about incentives than anything. Most of the river's water still goes to irrigate cropland in the Southwest, especially in Arizona, California. Arizona remains one of the largest cotton-producing states in the Union. The way in which water rights from the river are allocated played just as large a role in explaining why the Colorado never reaches the sea anymore and is rarely more than a trickle by the time it hits Yuma, Arizona, as any other variable. First, within the states, Western water laws allocate water based on historical usage, giving the user rights to a certain amount of water regardless of if they need it or if there is a more efficient way of using it. This means that users have no incentive to cut back usage, because if they did, for instance, if I were an Arizona cotton farmer and I wanted to invest in drip irrigation to reduce my water usage, I would lose my precious water rights. If I had 100,000 gallon a year or acre feet per year allotment, and all of a sudden I only use 5,000 for several years running, I will simply lose 95% of my water allocation and not get any compensation for the water that I do not use. So there was, and the idea behind that is, in the 1800s, right, when Arizona was empty, Nevada was empty, Utah was empty, there's enough water around for everybody, but the water laws were structured different there than in the eastern states, where the allocation of water is going to go upstream to downstream, and it's going to be based on proven usage. Think of the way the budget works in a bureaucracy as opposed to a private sector company. Right? What you spent last year, well, now you have rights to that in next year's budget. So instead of looking for ways to cut the budget and be more efficient, you're actually looking for ways to make sure you spend your entire budget so that you don't lose it to a different department, let's say. So that's kind of the way the Western water law works in general. This creates an incentive to use the total quantity allotted, since any water conserved would just be used by other parties. This is what many economists call a tragedy of the commons problem. No one party has an incentive to conserve a scarce and dwindling resource, even though its depletion is bad for everybody concerned. If Western farmers and ranchers had a way to sell the rights to their excess water to, say, residential users and conserve themselves, or invest the profits of these sales in ways to increase the efficiency of their operations from a water standpoint, then a better and lower stress allocation of water might be achieved at a more efficient price of water. But as it stands, the system delivers water to those with use rights as practical, upstream to downstream. There's no middle ground between getting your allocation and being told, as some farmers were for the first time in 2022 when the river hit that all-time low. Lake Mead hit only 1,040 feet, as we mentioned previously. Then getting told, there is no water for you. You have an allocation, in theory, but upstream users have already used all of the water, and there is simply none for you. So we're going to look at some supply-demand graphs to help this concept make sense here in my house on the whiteboard. And we're also going to talk a little bit about Nash equilibrium as it applies to this tragedy of the commons.
So let's start with a common way in which water rights are subjected to different markets. So in many parts of the country, including some states in the Southwest, there is a different price for agricultural users of water versus residential users of water. And this is largely due to the fact, like as we said, a lot of these ranches and farms in the West have water rights dating back to the 1800s or the first decades of the 1900s, and are grandfathered in at some allotted quantity of water that's coming at a much lower price than those in, say, a neighborhood in Mesa, Arizona, and suburban Phoenix are paying, or in Henderson, Nevada, and the suburbs of Las Vegas. And so what we have are these two graphs where we have a downward sloping demand curve in both. I hope we understand why the demand curve is downward sloping from the first couple episodes, right? Diminishing marginal utility to use of any good. And then we have supply curves, this one is not labeled, apologies for that are different. And the supply curve is set horizontally to indicate that no matter what quantity of water someone consumes, or in aggregate, that say agricultural users in Arizona, residential users consume, the price is constant per unit. It's not like a normal upward sloping supply curve where the price is going to adjust and be different at different quantities. So in the agricultural setting, we have a much lower price set, and therefore our equilibrium occurs obviously at P1. That's the only price at which the equilibrium could occur, because that's just the price per unit. But at this quantity one, that's pretty far to the right, so there's big quantity being used. In the residential case, we have a supply curve that's set much higher. We have a price that's set a lot higher than the agricultural price, and so the supply and demand curves intersect right here. We'll call this E1, or equilibrium point 1, and here the quantity is much lower, the price is much higher. Now, what if there existed a way that farmers could sell some of their allotment to the residential users? Well, not all of them would sell. There are some who are up on this portion of the demand curve, let's say, who have a really high marginal benefit that they're getting out of their water. Or this could represent, even for each individual farmer, the fact that they get more marginal benefit out of the first several units of water that they couldn't possibly replace. Even if they invested in a drip irrigation system, you still need some quantity of water. Even if it's 10% of what you use now, you still need that first 10% to run your farm. But there's diminishing marginal utility, right? So let's consider the farmer who's at this point right here, just above the supply curve. Let's call that point 2. Well, at point 2, he's willing, his marginal benefit of water is equal to a price that's just above P1, which means he could sell to somebody in the residential market who has to pay a price way up here at P1, and he'd be willing to sell down here, or at any price point between P1 and his marginal benefit of water, and they'd arrive at something in the middle. So if you had a way where you could transfer the water allocation rights, you'd arrive at a place where there's an equilibrium price, for water across the residential and agricultural markets that was the same. This process would continue with farmers a little bit higher on the demand curve with a little bit more marginal benefit selling into the residential market, and residents who are a little lower on the marginal benefit curve or the demand curve buying until we arrived at a new equilibrium price that was somewhere in the middle between the old residential price and the old agricultural price when they were separated markets. And at that point, due to the fact that agriculture is a much more intensive water use, despite the fact that you have Phoenix, Salt Lake City, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, the Central Valley, all relying on the Colorado for water, about 80% of Colorado River water still goes to agriculture. So you have to assume that if this sale is taking place, let's say, and this was a unified market, the result would be a price for water that was higher for farmers, but they're able to cash out on the portions of their allocation that they could still run their farms without using and can sell. A lower price of water for residential users, but overall a lower quantity of water used, period. Okay, so that's one way in which restructuring incentives could fundamentally alter how much water is used, right? And it's not from increasing the snowmelt, which would be great, but the western slope of the Rockies don't have the kind of glaciers they had in the 1930s when these allocations were set up. And it's not from drastic cuts, that force people to reduce their standard of living. It's from changing the incentives in unlocking this inefficiency in the market, or this failure to capitalize on the fact that there's a way to improve this. And that said, we're going to take a little look at a concept called Nash equilibrium, a little bit of game theory behind tragedy of the commons.
Not only is the water distributed from the Colorado River amongst individuals based on allocation rights, it's also distributed amongst the states that rely on the Colorado River, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, California, and Colorado, in a similar fashion. Each state is allocated a certain number of acre feet. An acre foot is the amount of water it would take to cover 1 acre 1 foot deep in water per year. These allocations were made in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, when average snowmelt was much higher and the distribution of the southwestern population was much sparser than today. The result is the same as for individual users within the western state. No state wants to cut its own usage unless the river is in an emergency stage, at which point the federal government, indirectly through the Colorado River Water Authority, imposes mandatory cuts on all states, which happened for the first time in 2022, and which promises to happen more regularly in the years ahead. So we're going to look at this dilemma, as we said, from the state point of view by analyzing the concept of pure strategy Nash equilibrium and a little bit of game theory, and we're going to do it imagining that we have two players in a game, the states of Arizona and California, and they have a choice whether to conserve or to use their water.
So as we said, we're going to look at a 2x2 matrix that kind of simplifies what we're talking about with this tragedy of the commons, or why the states don't have an incentive until we get to that emergency level where the federal government or the Colorado River Authority imposes mandatory cuts, don't have an incentive to conserve. So let's think of this game as simplified with only 2 states instead of all the states that use the Colorado. So on the top we have player 1 is Arizona, and on the horizontal part of our 2x2 matrix here we have player 2 is California. California is circled in blue because here on the boxes the benefit level that California derives is underlined in blue. It's sort of the y-coordinate of these x-y coordinate pairs. And Arizona's outcomes are underlined in red, and they're always the first component of our XY coordinate pairs. Okay, so player 1, Arizona, has 2 choices. It can conserve or it can use its full allotment of water from the Colorado. And remember, the amount of water flowing down the Colorado does not equal any longer the amount that's supposed to be flowing down as per the allotments, because those allotments were from 30s, 40s, 50s, when glacier melt out of the Rockies is much greater. All right, so if everyone uses their whole allotment, we are drawing down from reservoirs and drawing down from previous year's excess surplus water, because each year's snowmelt is not enough to hit the yearly allotment. So each player has 2 choices. They can conserve or they can use. Arizona's choice, California's choice. Okay, so let's look at what do these boxes mean. Let's say both states choose to conserve. Okay, so player 1 chooses to conserve, player 2, California, chooses to conserve, then we have this benefit matrix of 8, 8. And these are completely arbitrary numbers, but it just illustrates the principle. So what we're saying here is that California, underlined in blue, gets a benefit of 8, Arizona gets a benefit of 8, and the aggregate benefit to both states is 16. Okay, so that's conserve. Now how about if Arizona chooses to conserve, California chooses not to conserve but to use, then we're in this box down here. Arizona chooses to conserve and loses the benefit of being able to irrigate its farmlands, loses some tax revenue from lower agricultural output. Maybe it asks residents in Phoenix and Tucson to cut their residential water use, whatever. It results in a benefit of -10, right? Or a net cost. California just uses the water that Arizona basically forfeited. And California gets a benefit of 20. So we have -10, 20. and we add these two together, and the total aggregate benefit is 10. Okay, conversely, if Arizona chooses to use its allotment, but California chooses to conserve, just the exact opposite happens. Arizona gets a benefit of 20, California gets benefit -10 for the same reason. You know, they lose the ability, let's say, to irrigate the Central Valley, which produces most of America's nuts and almonds and olives and things like that, as well as many of its fruits and vegetables. So the aggregate benefit is again 10. Then what if both states use their full allotment? We have -7, -7, indicating both states have a cost because we run out of water, or there isn't enough water to go around, the price of water has to come up, whatever the case may be. Long run, this results in -7, -7, or aggregate -14. So obviously, from the aggregate point of view, the point of view of the Colorado River as a whole, and all the states that rely on it, the best outcome is conserve, right? Aggregate benefit is 16. And the worst outcome is use, right? Where both states elect to use their full allotment because aggregate benefit is -14, right? Both states actually incur a net expense here. But let's look at it not from the aggregate point of view, but from the point of view of each state. Let's go with Arizona. If you're Arizona and California plays the strategy conserve, okay? So we're either going to be in this box or this box because California has played the strategy that we've labeled conserve. Then what's in your best interest to do? We're either going to be in this box or this box. Okay, so if I play conserve, I get a benefit of 8 if I'm Arizona, but if I use, I get a benefit of 10. So if California conserves, then I should use. Here's where it gets interesting. What if California chooses to use, and I'm Arizona? Now what strategy should I play? I should still use, because if I conserve, I get -10. If I use, I only get -7. I have a smaller net expense. So, from the point of view of Arizona, I should always use no matter which strategy California plays. And since this is a symmetrical matrix where both states have the same incentives, and we've basically made this a mirror image, the same thing will happen if we do the analysis from California's point of view. If California knows that Arizona is playing the strategy conserve, well then if I also conserve, I get a benefit of 8. But if I don't, I get a benefit of 20. So I should use and get the benefit of 20. If Arizona plays the strategy use, I could conserve, but then I suffer a cost of 10. Or I could also use mine and suffer a cost of 7, which is better than -10. So I should use. So no matter which strategy Arizona plays, California should use. No matter which strategy California plays, Arizona's optimum strategy is to use. And so over here is what we call a pure strategy Nash equilibrium. Pure strategy Nash equilibrium, named after the economist and mathematician kind of described this whole concept. I believe his first name was John Nash. And so we get this weird situation where the default position is actually the worst aggregate outcome. There's only one aggregate benefit on this board that's less than 0. It's this one right here, -14, but we're going to arrive at it every single time because of the incentive structure of the game. And kind of similar to the individual farmers we were talking about, if there was a way that the states could sell each other portions of their water allotment at a fair price that wasn't so ridiculously low that the opportunity cost of use is still 0, then this game could balance itself out and arrive at an outcome that was much closer to the best aggregate outcome. But as the incentive is structured now, every state in the system has every incentive to use their full allotment until we get to emergency level where the reservoirs are so low. This is an imminent threat to Hoover Dam's ability to produce electricity, and the authority steps in and says, nope, everybody across the board, 20% cuts, 30% cuts. So just a cool application of this economics concept, this game theory concept of a pure strategy Nash equilibrium, right? And you can do this with more than 2 players, but it starts to get really complicated when we're looking at like larger matrices than 2 by 2. And this is a concept that, you know, irrespective of the content of this episode, you can apply this concept to many, many public resource problems, and just many problems that are not even economics related at all, where you have 2 players or 3 players, and and they all are kind of facing a decision matrix. One common application of this is known as the prisoner's dilemma, and I won't spend any time explaining it because you can look up a bazillion YouTube videos or online articles that explain the prisoner's dilemma. But anyway, so that's our dilemma in terms of prisoners of the Colorado River. For now, the Colorado continues to supply the Southwest, and the current system may hold for another few years or even a decade or 2 with heavier than average precipitation. But the system cannot sustain the Southwest for long at its current growth rate and with the current incentive structure. As populations around the world have had to do in the face of water scarcity, such as Cape Town, South Africa, which ran out of water in the summer of 2018, Americans in the southwestern states will soon have to cut usage or improve the efficiency and pricing of water to signal its real scarcity to the market, or else face a stark reality when nothing comes out of the tap. Hoover Dam costs blood and treasure to build. It is a marvel of engineering, and the Colorado is a mighty river. It is up to Americans of the 21st century to make sure that the sacrifices of the Americans of the 20th century who built Hoover Dam are not rendered obsolete by complacence and misaligned economic incentives. I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and hope to catch you again soon on this channel, whether for another one of these economics episodes or for some herping.